Hello, hello. Are you ready to start shuffling? I know I am. I take that deep breath because I feel like the subject I selected for this week is, at least to me, a little heavy. And you know what? I've added myself before as very idealistic, very optimistic. I love focusing on the positive in everything. So to have a whole lesson structured around what if things go wrong? What about all the bad things that can happen in a tarot card reading is just, to me, oh, what an uncomfortable space to live in for an hour. But we're going to do it. We're going to do it. It's a really important subject to cover. If you're a beginner reader, you probably haven't come up against these situations because you're probably not doing a whole lot of readings for other people. And if you are doing other readings, it's probably for a close friend or family member who's going to have a lot of understanding. It's just going to be a totally different environment. But if you're approaching an intermediate level and you're starting to offer yourself as a tarot card reader to more and more people who are new friends or acquaintances or complete strangers, then a lot of this starts to come into play. There are just many pitfalls that we can fall into. And I know a lot of the common mistakes that happen. I know how to navigate out of them when you're in a reading. And I know a lot of the safeguards that you can put in place to kind of preempt and circumvent these, things that can go sour in a reading before they happen. So I can say happily that in my own memory, the last time that I had a reading that I'll share this story a little later. Last time that I had a reading that really went south and just didn't go well was probably when I was a freshman in college. I remember it really distinctly because, it's one of those moments if you're something's really dramatic, bad, embarrassing, whatever it be. Those are the things you remember, right? I remember this reading. It is the last really reading in my, well, I guess it's not really recent memory. If it's freshman year in college, it's over 10 years. That's a little while back. But anyway, really important subject to consider. And want to be really honest and frank about the kinds of situations you may encounter as a reader. I really wanted to use this deck today. It's been a little while since I've played with you. This deck was actually gifted to me. I worked for a while at a holistic medicine store, and I actually offered readings at the store. Every Wednesday I'd set up my table, and it was really fun. I met so many people, and I got to do hundreds of readings. It was such a great opportunity. Very grateful to the owner of that store for allowing me to set up in their shop. It was, symbiotic. I pulled in some foot traffic. It worked. But this deck was gifted to me by someone that came to the store, encountered me as a reader, and were impressed enough that they were like, I have this, and honestly, I'm not using it or driven to use it, and felt compelled to share it with me. So thank you so much. And I'm going to say anonymous person because honestly, they came into the store and didn't even give me their name. It was just a little bump and some appreciation. There are some really profoundly generous souls out there that just thank you for bringing that light into my life and that warm story for me to share here, and without even needing their name attached to it. Wasn't important. So I have this deck. This deck's beautiful. A lot of the pip cards are kind of low-key. They just show the pips. There's a Ten of Pentacles. There's my, what are we looking at? Six of Wands, right? Just shows them. The aces are beautiful. There's an Ace of Cups. So this deck's a little simpler in that the minor arcana don't have full illustrations. So a deck like this, once you're a little more familiar with the cards, is going to be fine to read with. But as you're ramping up, I do like using a deck that has all those images to help, offer more sort of intuitive inspiration as you're really going through interpreting the cards in a reading. Before I dive into the meaty segment here and start talking about everything that can go wrong in tarot card readings, I want to offer a reading to us here at the stream. I feel like it's only appropriate that, kind of in line with the subject of our lesson today, that I make it about mistakes. And this is going to be drawn a little more generally. I'm going to be considering I'm going to talk a lot today about how to handle things when they do go wrong, how to prepare in ways that prevent them from going wrong in the first place. So I want this card to really talk to us about where should we be wary of making mistakes in our own lives? Where should we be focusing that, like, this is the area that I need to be careful and calculated about, you know? Because we're about to talk today about some of the planning you can do before you're there that helps you navigate that situation smoothly. So I'm wondering, when we're speaking more generally about mistakes in our lives together here, this small group, where's the area in our life that we're really focusing? That's something I really want to ask to give clarity, focus, and scope for a reading that's for many of us, small group reading, which are difficult readings to give a defined scope. I'm actually going to use a card to narrow the scope for us. It's not quite everything on its own. Look out for mistakes in this area. Okay, now what? So, I'm going to give it a little companion here. I think that the next card would be, here's how to navigate those mistakes. And I might even suggest, here's how to prepare in ways that, just stop you from ever arriving at the mistake. I've been talking about, that's one of the things I'm going to address here on the shuffle. So I think it's only appropriate we have those similar cards for our reading, for ourselves. I'm going to save these as I go through and interpret them over the course of this hour. But I'm going to start with this first card focusing on where are we looking for where in our life are we focusing on that we can improve how we manage mistakes there, that we can prepare in ways that prevent us from having mistakes there, or that, we can navigate our way out. Here is our focus, our scope. For us, that one today is a King of Diamonds. This deck does have illustrations for the court cards, although they do look more like the traditional playing card. You just got the two kings back to back there. Oh, the King of... Well, it's funny. I said King of Diamonds because it actually says King of Diamonds on this card. This deck is kind of between a tarot card deck and a playing card deck, I suppose. It's a King of Pentacles, if we're just working our analogy suits here across the tarot and playing card deck. Wow, interesting to draw this in terms of focus on where you might make mistakes here. The King of Pentacles really draws our attention to those things that are very practical and that you can't do some other way. The King of Pentacles is working with things that have a certain realistic, necessary way they must go, and there's no other way it works. There are some things in life you need to do a certain way. There's just no other way to do it. And the King of Pentacles is the character who's like serious, brass tacks, pull up the bootstraps, whatever's called of me that's necessary, I'm ready to deliver because it's necessary. And that's valuable to the King of Pentacles. So I think that for us today, as we're thinking about where can I bring these lessons about mistake management in my life, it's going to be about those really serious, down-to-earth, practical issues, where there is a concrete answer to what we need to do. Where it's crystal clear. Like, that's a mistake and there's no debating it kind of space. I'll flip these other cards as I get there. There are a lot of different kind of things that could happen that took you to a sour place in a tarot card reading. So I want to touch on some of the most common ones that I've experienced as a reader and how to navigate those. I'd say, the first one that I want to touch on is one that's probably going to be most common for newer readers. And that is, you're sitting here, you're flipping over cards, you're starting to really vibe, and you're just in the moment flowing, and the words are just coming to you and coming through you, and it feels so great. And you start vibing on yourself so much that you just keep talking, and you slip in a lot of stuff that was a little off base. You speak a little outside your authority. You speak a little beyond that divinated message, a little beyond what was needed or called for in that situation. You make a misstep. You say too much. Happens. Absolutely happens. This is a hard moment in the reading for the person receiving the reading. And a lot of what I'm going to talk about today is really about readings with two people, one person giving another person a reading, because this process is really different, when you're doing it for yourself. And I think a lot of these pitfalls don't exist in that scenario. Thank you, Chris. I was really happy with the Eldritch today. Honestly, I will tell you, when I finished this, I was like, that is one of the most bomb Eldridges I have tied up in a while. So thank you so much for for the A+++. Believe me, you just touched my pride in a way that really got to the core of me. Thanks. But so you've said something that was outside of what you should have. And maybe since you've, overstepped what you really knew or what was necessarily being intuitively offered to you, you could just be honestly saying things that are totally off base, totally wrong. And when you've slipped into that place in a reading, you're speaking with a voice that has this divine authority, and you're saying things that are simply not going to be able, they're not going to be able to relate to and aren't going to be honest or true to them. That's a serious misstep in a reading, and it's easier to do than you'd think. So, I don't want anyone that encounters this happening to themselves in a reading to get too down on themselves. It's a very surprisingly easy mistake when you're in the moment. Because so much of what we say in a tarot card reading, especially when we're like bringing up and channeling intuitively those words that just come to us and firing from the hip, really easy to slip off the rails. Sneak a couple things that you'd wish you could take back. I want to talk about the quorum's experience, the person receiving the reading in this moment, because they're suddenly challenged. There's something you say that doesn't line up for them, and they're either feeling uncertain or uncomfortable with the assertion that didn't really land with them, or they're honestly just settling into a place of, okay, you're full of crap. Like, you're just saying whatever, and I'm just going to nod here until we're done and I can go, because now I just really don't trust what you have to say, because you have, given to me that voice of divine authority now just doesn't have truth behind it. So I just am less interested in what you have to share and say at this point in the reading, So there are a couple things I think it's really important to do at this point in a reading. As soon as you recognize you have stepped outside your bounds and said something you shouldn't have. And believe me, you will be able to recognize it. It is fair to say, there's a lot of critique for tarot card readings that people will say it's just cold reading. And I like to say that cold reading's a part of it. I gotta be honest, I do a decent cold read on people. I'm very empathic. I'm really clued into how they're feeling, as we're going through this. And that really helps. That really helps you join that person in their emotional space as you're delivering what can sometimes be some really tough messages to have to digest. So I don't want to discount that, being able to listen to the person you're giving a reading and take in what you see and feel from them, that's really important. And honestly, through that avenue, if you're really listening while you're speaking, is when you're going to notice, whoops, that one was just me thinking I would sound cool saying it. That wasn't divine advice, and you can, if you're really keyed into them, you'll feel the moment that there's that shift, and it's like, oh, I'm sorry. And it's, I think, paramount. Number one, most important thing to do in this moment that you've said something you shouldn't have is to say so. Call it out. Whoops, I'm sorry. Actually, that doesn't feel quite right. Something like that. But that was a little off. Maybe more like, get back in. But, erase it. Errata. Strike that. Never mind. Very important to own up to it right away. And the sooner you can, the quicker you're going to just be able to get back into the flow together and move forward, kind of unified. Because in that moment, they are experiencing, that doesn't sound right. So the very least you can do is, yeah, you're right. It wasn't. It wasn't. Sorry. Got carried away, and for whatever reason that was on my mind before this, that's something I'm going through, that's something I told someone else another day, whatever that had that idea that I just kind of slipped in here for some reason, that had no place here in our reading. My apologies. A lot of times, if someone sometimes they'll point out to you that's wrong. It is very important to be humble in that moment and be like, wow, sorry, you're right. Okay, so working with that, knowing that that's not the case, here's the message that we're trying. You got to move forward with that. That's part of the reading now. Part of the reading is that mistake, that misstep that happened. And it's going to be one of the steps in the process of you guys crafting this message that really does give some meaningful guidance. But, step one, if you've made a mistake, own up to it. Pretty basic, right? Pretty basic stuff. Make sure you own up to it. And then, I guess, following that is incorporated into the reading. Be smooth, be free form, be okay. It's okay to make mistakes. We're all human. It's going to happen. Even when we're cool, divinary tarot card readers, we're still human. This is a human messenger. I'm doing my best, So it's important to keep that in mind. And I think that's the scariest situation to encounter is when you've just said something off base or something false in a tarot card reading, when you were trying to speak from a place of divine, fundamental truth of the world authority. Really scary moment. So I wanted to touch on that first because it's one of the hardest ones to navigate in a reading. There are a number of different reasons that can come out in a reading. So I want to touch on some of the things that lead into the moment you said something wrong. And, one of them, I kind of touched on a short list there. If you're going through something and it's just close enough to the person you're giving a reading that you kind of relate, it's really easy to switch and start talking to yourself about your experience because it's so closely related. And that's when you say something that feels right to you because it does resonate with you. And it's such a similar scenario to theirs. We just happened to bump into each other at the right time in our lives that we're sharing this challenge. And you've got some idea that clicks and makes it feel so simple and so straightforward because it clicks for you. And it doesn't click for them. Oh no. That happens. Absolutely happens. So important to check. Okay, what of these are my feelings coming up, and what of these are those outside kind of intuitive messages that I'm trying to offer? And that can be difficult to distinguish the difference between those feelings. And honestly, I think that through the many years of my practice, I have become more and more acquainted with this distinct feeling of knowing the truth and power and healing and wisdom and guidance in some words that, I just feel it. I know they're right for you, but I couldn't tell you exactly why. Just a feeling. And when you're trying to draw on that very hard to pin down emotional experience in yourself and read it and be like, okay, I'm certain that these are the words because they just feel so right. Very important to check yourself. And is this coming from and for me? Or is it coming from and for you? You just got to really ask yourself that. Sometimes that'll catch you. Sometimes that could be the reason you made a misstep. One of the other reasons that it can happen, and now I'm going to share the story of that reading I did freshman year of college, because it happened this time, is... I'll just tell the story. I'll just tell the story and it'll be clear. So it was like between semesters, I think I'd gone home and I had actually sat with my younger brother and I'd done a reading with him. And it was this really challenging reading where he had to really recognize a lot of the ways in which he was the maker of his own challenges. All these problems that he was facing were also stemming from his conception of them. And it was, this really interesting reading that wrapped it up really nicely and gave us a clear, the first step is just realizing that this is coming from you, and then the rest kind of follows, kind of reading. It was actually really uplifting and wonderful reading. So I do that reading. A week later, go to school, sitting in the dorms on the floor and sitting with someone who I've only just met because we're all, freshmen having a great time meeting each other. And they had this remarkable story of making it themselves and getting to school themselves. They just didn't have the parental support and the kind of familial support that most of us at that college did. So they really had this remarkable story of, I did it myself. I got all the loans in place. I worked really hard and got enough money to be able to do this. And they were kind of facing, but it's still really hard. And there's, a lot of this over my head. I'd like to look at that in a reading. So we did. What happened to me in this reading is I didn't really clear the energy and intention kind of from myself, from the deck, of that last reading I did with my brother. So as I haphazardly and too quickly leapt into laying a Celtic cross and flipping them all over, I started to tell the same story and the same message that I'd offered my brother a moment ago. It was just fresh on my mind, fresh in my soul, and I was like, I'm dispensing wisdom. This is what it feels like, and but it wasn't at all for her. It really wasn't. Because the message was totally off base. And I remember a moment in the reading where she was looking at me and she was like, it doesn't make sense what you're saying right now because it makes it sound like it's my fault. And she was right. She was right. Now, I wish I had all the experience of a tarot card reader that I do today then, because I did not do a lot of the things that I'll explain, today about how to fix those moments in a reading. We just kind of wrapped up feeling disappointed. But always to remember that it's important to take some time to really clear your mind, set your intention, shuffle your deck, clear your deck, set its intention, and make sure that you're really there and to nowhere else. Not with a previous reading, not with what happened yesterday. Just you are clear of everything else and ready to receive only this reading, this moment. I think is a really important prerequisite going into a reading. If only I'd done that then, I wouldn't be telling you this story now about that mistake I made. One of the other things that can go wrong in a reading is when you end up delivering something that's not exactly what they wanted. This can happen for a couple of reasons. One of them is that you have a challenging message to share. They come to me and say, I'm having trouble in my relationship. I want to fix it up. I'm just looking for how. And we're laying cards and the message coming is just like, girl, give up, wash your hands, get out while the getting's good. It's just like lost cause, right? And that's not the intention they came to me for a reading. They were telling me, I'm committed. How do I fix it? So suddenly we're in a really hard place in the reading. We're at a real impasse here when I'm like, honestly, I'm looking down and there isn't a how do I fix it? The how do I fix it just makes it so clear that it's not worth fixing and that you're so much better off just letting yourself go from it. But how do I say that in a reading when I'm seeing it to someone who wants so fervently for me to tell them the opposite, that it can be fixed, that there is a way and this is the way to fix it? Suddenly you're in a really dicey situation. Cutting news that contradicts what someone wants to do is something that you have to do so gingerly. And honestly, you have to do it with them and it has to come from them. If so, here would be the mistake. I just spit that out. Girl, get over it. Dump him. It's not worth it. Immediately they're going to react with a lot of resistance. And a lot of rejection of you and your ideas, and want to wrap up, clean up, and get out because you're not giving me what I came here for. I asked you, how do I fix it? I didn't ask you to tell me break up with him. I didn't ask for your hocus pocus, flip a coin, tell me if my relationship's good or not. I asked, how do I fix it? So I think it's really important when you're in that kind of a reading and you recognize that, oh my gosh, where I want to be at the other end of this conversation is with you softened to the idea of getting out of this relationship for yourself. We're starting over here though. The conversation started with how do I fix it? So you've got to stay there and start there, honestly, when you're navigating this kind of situation and work with them through the things they would have to do to fix it. and then maybe sneak in some suggestions for other cards, like, what they get from fixing the relationship. But things that will make clear that it's not valuable enough, and you might not want to suggest what you get for getting out of the relationship, but just, after I'm doing these things to fix, where do I wind up? Oh, in the same familiar cycle of abuse. Great. That sounds awful. And if that's the case coming up in a reading, they may at that point start to see the writing on the wall, right? But you have to walk through it from where they're coming at it. How do I fix this? Well, like this. And if you did, you'd get this. Is that what you want? And that's where you got to leave it. Anytime that you're trying to give someone direction, you just have to illustrate what's there and ask, is that what you want? You're not going to direct their will. That's not the service I provide. I'm not here to tell you what to do. I'm going to say that every week, aren't I? Not here to tell you what to do. Here to help you figure out what you want to do. And it's really important if you're approaching tarot reading with that mindset. Of course, I just repeating myself. Start with where they came from. Work your way from there. Even if we started pretty far from where we need to arrive, gotta start with them. The reading has to be directed by them as much as possible, because that will draw it more into their personal experience and make it stronger and more relatable. Just why I'm always asking questions when we're doing readings. And I think intake and the face down card, intention setting, is the most important part of a reading. Honestly, there is a lot of magic in the execution of intuiting these divine messages, so I shouldn't discount that. But it is very important work, that intention setting beforehand. So that can be, one thing when you're trying to deliver a message that they don't want to hear. That can be a tricky situation that can turn into a sour reading real fast. There's another one where, depending how we come into the reading, we each have our own preconceptions or expectations of what tarot is about, what is supposed to come from a tarot reading, and how it's supposed to work. For a long time, actually, for many years, actually, it's probably only within the last 4 or 5 that I stopped opening readings like this, I would ask, what's your previous experience with tarot? Right away. I want to know up front where you've experienced it and how you've experienced it and what you think it is. Because I think that I have a somewhat unique approach to reading tarot cards that defies a lot of the typical norms that you'd expect to see in tarot as it's more depicted in like mainstream media, or tarot as it may be to many people who have experienced it differently than the way I'm offering it, So if I sit down with someone and they're going into this reading with the expectation that I'm going to be able to tell them about their future, or that I'm going to tell them what to do up front, that I'm going to be able to have concrete answers to kind of uncertain yes or no answers, that's a dicey situation. If we're already starting the reading with mismatched expectations, I am just set up to disappoint them when they start asking me questions that I give them roundabout answers to, and that I'm trying to reframe the question, because I'm like, I'm not trying to do that. I'm not trying to flip a coin for you, give you yes, no. Now they're frustrated because I'm just not giving them the answer. I'm not measuring up to what they expected or wanted from a tarot card reader. So for a long time, I asked, what's your understanding of tarot? Met them there and explained my own approach, that's a little less deterministic, a little less predictive, a little more about the process and about our personal experience. And if we're then set with a similar expectation and you're still bought into it and want to sit down and do the reading, we're good. But I have made the mistake before, and that's why I started asking, what do you know about tarot? Made the mistake before of going into a reading where they wanted something I wasn't ready to give. And when you're halfway through a reading and it's clear you're not giving what they want, that's a disappointing reading and a disappointed person. Very important to have clear expectations up front for what we both expect to come from the reading. Make sure we're on the same page, just so we're not set up for disappointment down the road 15 minutes from now when I'm trying to reframe that question that you thought was the zinger, the one that I was going to answer for you and everything was going to be great. That's important to consider. I want to look back at the cards that we've drawn for ourselves here for a moment. Talked a lot about some of the various scenarios that you can encounter disappointment in. And here we are looking at how we might make missteps in those areas of our life where there's simply one way it has to be. And there is no doing it the right or wrong way. There's doing it the way it must be done. And doing it the wrong way or outside of that is simply setting you up for failure. Brass tacks, King of Pentacles, straightforward. So in those areas where it is just so clear after the fact that a mistake has been made, I talked about setting a clear expectation and intention beforehand. And that's one of those, like, you can do this before you get into the reading to circumvent and just totally get around that disappointing situation ever happening. So I want to look at our card for how we prepare ourselves, how we safeguard ourselves, what we do in the meantime before mistakes have happened that get us around from having them happen at all, or at least soften them if they do. This one's for us. Wow. I'm looking at Death, 13th of the major arcana. Really like this illustration of death. A lot of tarot decks have death looking a little softer, a little happier, carrying the rose and really being framed as, death that makes space for new life to bloom. This one's a much more traditional reaper, and even a lot of the skeletal body just shamelessly thrust out. The symbol is a skull and crossbones. This death is a little more forward than death cards I've seen in other tarot decks. My interpretation of this card is that if there are things in our life that simply don't serve us anymore, why are we still putting our time and energy into them? Anyway, cut away the dead leaves, the old branches. Cut them away. If there's something in your life that is just poised to become a mistake, is just something that is sunk cost, like I am just pouring more and more money or more time and energy into, the money pit, kind of beater car, or just I know I've lost this, but I'm just stuck on it anyway. Let go. Let go before you just try something is not going to work. That'll keep you out of some mistakes. Be willing and ready to cut things out of your life that you expect and could reasonably predict. Remember, we're King of Pentacles. Could reasonably predict. Could go wrong. Could put me in a situation where I will just fail or make mistakes or disappoint. Just cut them out. Don't need them. That's a really fierce message for us in this small group. That is some very dramatic, I would not walk up to someone and be like, are you afraid of failure? Then don't try. What kind of message is that? But honestly, that's what came forward for me in this reading in terms of, not afraid of failure, don't try, but if recognizing doesn't serve me anymore, stop feeding it. I think to clarify that. But it was pretty close to if afraid of failure, don't try, which just tickles me pink. That is the most discouraging, low self-esteem reaffirming kind of message I could ever concoct. I want to talk about more of the safeguards that I really put in place for my own practice to prevent a lot of these mistakes from ever happening. Because I'm happy that I've really ironed out the wrinkles in my process, and now don't really face that many disappointing readings. They just don't. They're so rare if they happen at all. And even if they do happen, I'm just so comfortable navigating that situation that I don't remember it as a disappointing reading. We bounced back from it and it ended great. It was that little blip that I was like, I mean, not that, but you know, moving on. It's, I think what's really important, really, 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 really important, and this is why I keep running home, it's one of the most important things in tarot, intention setting. Set that intention so clearly. Just, you know, and part of that intention setting is also our shared expectations, you know, that I was talking about a moment ago, that we're sharing in what we expect to come from this card. You know, what we expect it to give us is something that we're joined on in together before it's been flipped. Most of the times that you're making mistakes in readings is because you flipped your cards over too early and then tried to interpret something that you just weren't ready to interpret. The half-baked message that now is hard to place because you're looking at the card and trying to retroactively apply it to places in your life instead of letting it bring a message to the place in your life that you intended it to. So really a lot of these pitfalls can be totally circumvented and just never even brought near the reading with really powerful intention setting. But that requires some important discussion between you and the person that you're giving a reading. I would say that, you know, depending on the attitude that someone brings to a reading, sometimes I sit down with someone and we are just so aligned in our expectation and what we want to accomplish there that it's like we just get right to work. In the second minute, we're drawing cards and I'm like, this is awesome. I am so happy to sit with you and just vibe together. Here's your message. You rock on. Yeah. Sometimes there's readings like that. Every now and then we sit down and I will spend up to 10, 15 minutes talking about tarot, about how I practice tarot, about what you want from a tarot reading, about what your preconceptions of tarot are, and about the unique, you know, features of my practice. Everyone has a slightly different way that they're going to offer tarot readings, or they're going to offer slightly different services with them. I want to clarify what mine is. You know, if I'm sitting with someone who came in with very different expectations or just a lot of uncertainty and doubt, I'm going to spend a lot more time setting us up for the reading before we dive into something that we're not ready for. Honestly, all of these mistakes is often because you didn't take enough time to prepare. You weren't ready. Sat down and tried to give that reading freshman year and I wasn't ready. So eager to be cool and impressive and draw the cards. Wasn't ready. Needed some time to really clear my mind, shuffle, think, listen, ask questions. Just rushed. Wasn't ready. Don't rush it. Don't rush a reading. No need to rush a reading. When we are sitting down to do a tarot card reading, we are making a quiet, contemplative, patient space for ourselves. You know, that's the rich environment in which we're really going to feed ourselves and draw some really meaningful wisdom from. And it can't be another way. If it's rushed, it's going to be slapstick, it's going to be dirty, it's going to be hard to understand or misleading, or, you know, it's just, don't rush it. Don't rush your tarot card readings. Telling people to take some time between flipped cards is often great advice for a beginner reader who will just like lay 3 down all face up or a whole Celtic cross and then try to interpret it. Like, give yourself some time. Lay them face down, set their intentions, flip 1, digest. Really digest. I'm ready. Flip another. You know, it's a very measured kind of approach to a reading is certain to, I know, this is kind of funny. I feel like I'm saying something obvious. If you're slow and careful, you'll make less mistakes. Yes, tarot works the same way as life. Imagine. It's, yeah. Don't rush. Share expectations. Listen. Listening is important. And it's I should talk about listening for a moment, because there are different settings in which I'll do readings, and in some of them we don't have the luxury of being able to listen, to the person we're giving a reading to. Namely, when it's a reading over some sort of text communication, email, or any of these social networks. When you're delivering it there, and it's not in real time, and we're not on screen or on the phone even. That's a different setting to try and do a reading. You don't get the advantage of listening. You can ask some questions for initial intake, but on that kind of a reading, you're definitely keying into your intuition and reading from there much more, much more. Almost singly. I like to spend a fair amount of time with those readings. The micro reading on my website is like a $5 to $10 reading, and it's text only. And I spend honestly way too long on them, because I just love to spend a lot of time with readings. But it's I do like to spend my time really deliberating and really feeling that what's written still resonates and has that magic knowing feeling. It come forth from me when I'm rereading it. I'm like, yes, those words are so potent, so magical. I can feel it. Now I'll send that. I'm doing a lot more checks and balances with myself and my intuition if I'm relying on it so heavily in a reading, to be the mechanism that offers most or all of the message. Be careful. Be careful. I want to talk a little bit more about, I named this finding value in disappointing readings, and I framed it that way because oftentimes, when you're trying to recover from a mistake in a reading, finding value is the mindset you need. When you said something and someone is now feeling frustrated with you or doubting you, one of the worst things you can do is become offended, become, angry, or what have you. You're just going to feed into it and feed the frustration and the disagreement. It's that, which is why I guess when I was talking earlier, I was like, be humble, own up to it. My mistake. I shouldn't have said that. You're right. Before you've done that, we can't even move forward. We have to reconciliate and clean up what just happened before we can move forward in a reading together. There's no other way. So that's really, really important. And it's going to be really hard in that moment, because you're dealing with, oh my God, I'm ashamed and embarrassed that I made that mistake. I'm upset with you for challenging me because I thought it was great. I am nervous and anxious because it looks like this is drifting into a terrible reading. And oh my gosh, it's going poorly. I'm scared. Just all these feelings come up, and none of them are helpful for navigating out of the dicey spot. They're all just more and more traps. So it's really important that in that moment that you've made your misstep, you're recognizing it, because we're listening, we're watching, we're listening. You recognize it and you're challenged. Accept that and embrace that. Right. I will take that blow, because it'd be totally wrong of me to deny it. I just can't. Gotta be humble. Sometimes we speak with such authority in tarot card readings because we're like gleaning some powerful messages, and every now and then the way that somebody needs to hear it is this really strong, affirmative, this is the way it is for you. And that can be a really powerful voice for people to receive in a reading, and to be able to have the affirmation for themselves that that's the way it is for them, and move forward with that mindset. Sometimes that's really helpful and really powerful, but when you're doing that in a reading, you're going out on a limb. I am making a claim that I feel and know is true, but I couldn't rationally or reasonably explain or describe to you why it is. I just know it is. And now it's yours. That's a really strong place to be operating from. But it's also the dangerous one where you can make your mistakes in. I spoke a little earlier about the tangle of feelings inside. What's the intuitive knowing feeling? What's the feels good to me feeling? What's the, I'm just really I've sat with this long enough that I've convinced myself that it must be right, because I just keep thinking that must be right, must be right, must be right. Now it feels right. Just catch yourself. Be humble, be open-minded, be meditative. Constantly just the mind is clear and ready to receive anything. This is a face down card. It could be anything. Even when it's face up, there's so many just variable ways to interpret this card. It could still mean different things than I just tried to say to you. Now, of course, if you've got this knowing feeling that it doesn't mean those different things, then, go right ahead. But when you recognize you've made the misstep and the bad read, own up to it. Don't let that moment pass without repairing it, without acknowledging it. I think that's the mark of a really strong reader, is when they can admit when they're wrong. It's hard to do. Hard to admit when you're wrong, regardless what you're doing. But especially when you're in a tarot card reading and you want to be speaking in this way and be perceived in this way, where I am the truth sayer. I am the soothsayer. I am the one that just delivers these divine messages. They are infallible. I'm never wrong. It's this attitude that we can kind of almost don as tarot card readers, and it's really dangerous. Really a dangerous attitude, because it traps you, it closes your mind to possibilities, and if you do make one of these mistakes, which you might, because we are human, especially while we're learning a new craft, especially something as intuitive and kind of subjective and artistic as tarot card readings, there's plenty of room for error, and you gotta recognize when you've made it. Wonder how many times I've said that. Gotta recognize when you've made your error. I almost wish I was counting, but it's just too high, too many times. That's a big takeaway here, if anyone's curious. It's a big takeaway. So I've talked a lot about recognize the fault. Recognize the fault is step one in repairing the fault. I'm curious now, since I'm on that subject, what this third card is for us. So the intention here was, this is how we prepare and circumvent mistakes before they happen. This is the area in our life where we're expecting to see that we could improve on terms of limiting or mitigating mistakes. Was our King of Diamonds. It's given a really nice focus. Sorry, King of Pentacles. This card was the how to navigate out of the mistakes once they've been made. Let's say there was something that we didn't recognize wasn't serving us anymore, and we didn't cull from our lives. So we were holding on to something that was better off left dead. But we didn't. We didn't let death have it. We moved on. We're in our very practical, very real, very definitive, I made a mistake and there's no if, and, or but about selling it any other way from this place. It is like so obvious. It's the kind of mistake where it's like, oh, I dropped a stack of books and they're all over and many of them are damaged. Whoops. There's no denying this. It is not subjective. It's not maybe. It is done. Oops. Sorry. There's just no denying that one. It's plain facts right in front of us. I made a mistake. This is where we're focusing. So when we're there, how do we clean up? Love this. Knight of Spades. I'm very excited to interpret this card. So we're looking at it. Knight of Swords. This deck does write those, playing card suits. So I keep thinking that, and I read with playing cards so often. I practice cartomancy that spades, swords are like the same in my mind right now at this point. But yes, swords. Knight of Swords is this character who is very forward. This reason I was very excited is because this really describes a lot of what I've been saying, that you've got to be active. You've got to be on top of it. You've got to put yourself out there and say, I see it and recognize it. I want to write it. I want to find direction for us that fixes this. I am ready to act right now. I've got ideas of how to fix this right now. I am picking up the books. I'm evening out the spines. I'm asking how much it will cost to replace them. I'm ready to own up to it. I'm trying to cover everything. I've got 100 different ideas as the Knight of Swords, and I'm ready to do all of them. And I'm gonna, I'm not waiting for your green light to do them either. I'm just going to go ahead and start doing them. So I am coming forward in the reading and saying, I made a mistake. And I'm not going to ask you to point it out to me because I recognize it happened. We're keyed into each other empathically right now. I said that. I know myself well enough that I slipped out of my intuitive divination and into my own feelings, and I'm sorry, I made a mistake. Scratch that. Very active, very in there. Just, I'm going to charge in Knight of Swords and fix this. Okay, now that I've done that, I'm not done. The Knight of Swords is never done. Honestly, it just keeps doing things. I'm now going to reroute us to the reading back where we were. I'm going to, keep moving forward with new ideas that keep us moving on the cleanup, from the mistake. I like doing readings like this for groups. Usually when you end up doing readings for groups, in my experience, when you do readings for groups, it starts to become more of a general message of just the way that things work in general, because that is where we all meet and relate. Every now and then you get a small group that by some wonderful coincidence all share this very specific challenge together and become this beautiful support group for each other, that it comes up in the conversation for all of us with the cards, and that's really cool. But more often than not, when I'm reading for a room, it's general. When you make mistakes that are undeniable in areas of your life that you could have cut out, you've got to be active about cleaning up the mess and figuring out where you go forward from here. The Knight of Swords is always charging forward. So we're thinking about that. And this is, I bring that up because I look at this and I'm like, honestly, reflecting on this reading, it looks just like them's the breaks. That's how the world works, That's what happens when you make mistakes. But with a little slant. Goodness, that death was unexpected to me. That card over there. That is an interesting slant for us, I think. That feels more unique for us to take away, just to recognize that there are areas in our lives that we could cut things out if they're not going well, or we reasonably expect them to not go well, or for us to not perform well there, or for it to not serve us or be valuable. Cut it out before I get started. Don't need it. If I can tell you right now before I've started that I don't need it, I definitely don't need it. I'm done. Done with that. That felt a little unique to me. King of Pentacles was a cool focus for us to say specifically mistakes that are completely factual and very clear. Like I was, my example, like dropping something, like I made a mistake. Even more of a mistake than I said something wrong in a tarot card reading, which feels a little more like, did I? Or was I close? Or how much did I say that was wrong? No. I dropped the ball. My bad. What do I do now? Hyperactive fix it. And honestly, this Knight of Swords approach to fixing a mistake does feel a little individualized for us as a group, and definitely folded into the conversation that I'd set up prior before drawing the card very nicely. Thank you for that draw. That was easy. But it does feel like a straightforward, like, if you make a mistake, put yourself forward to clean it up. Feels really like straightforward, obvious advice to me, I didn't need tarot to know that, but it was nice to have that, that message given to me as a timely reminder in this focus. There's so many times in readings that I feel like we pull out fundamental truths that are like, well, yes, anyone would agree with you that that's true. But where the magic happened was, that was exactly what I was going through in this moment. That's exactly what I needed to hear to kind of keep going. That's always the magic moment in a tarot card reading for me, is that the very specific message is like where I was at and the guidance I needed. Even though I knew that when you make a mess, clean it up and be forward, put yourself forward to clean it up. Don't wait for someone to ask you. I knew that. But while we were considering the topic of making mistakes in general, I needed the reminder. I needed it summarized as, that's at the core of this. That's what's most important. Forget the rabble and the speculation about the other things you could do to fix mistakes. Just, if you focus here, you're fine. This is like your number one priority that'll get you through it the whole way, wire to wire. You're going to be fine. Just be a Knight of Swords. Get in there, clean it up. Clean it up. No questions, Own up to it. No questions. I made a mistake. Now I'm going to do something to fix it. Like, that's the most, honorable thing to do in that moment is I am responsible for this. I will fix it. I will find ways to fix it if they're not obvious as a Knight of Swords.